Hi, this is Melissa Muir. Today I'm going to talk about the coil cutter that is currently offered by Potter USA. When you order your basic kit, you have two different options. You can order it so that it goes with a flex shaft or with a Dremel, and these two bushings allow you to attach it to either one of those. So you would just order one or the other, unless you wanted to have that versatility, and then you can just order the separate bushing. Now these allow your blade guard here to attach to the handpiece of either your flex shaft or your Dremel. It also comes with an Allen wrench so that you can tighten up various screws that are used in the system. We have the saw blade arbor, a saw blade. We also have the coil holder, and we have a blade guide that allows you to kind of guide your blade along safely and carefully as you go through and you cut your blades. Now you also have the two screws that attach your blade guide to your coil holder. The coil holder also has two different grooves. We've got a little larger groove on the top and a smaller groove here along the bottom so that you can work with different size coils. We also have two different options for additional items that you can purchase. You've got two different sets of mandrels that you can purchase, and they've got the US measurement that are done in fractions of an inch. You also have a metric unit that's done in millimeters, starting at 1 millimeter, going up every half millimeter until you reach 13 millimeters. There's also a coil winder, and then what you can do with that is wrap your wire around one of the mandrels by the coil winder, and that just makes things kind of easy. Those two items, well in this case three, they're not mandatory, but they are kind of nice to have. The first thing I need to do is attach my blade guard to my flex shaft handpiece. So like I said, in this case I am using the flex shaft, not a Dremel, but the process would be the same if you were. Okay, so I've got two screws here that are going to tighten things into place. I will tighten this into the blade guard, and then we'll go on and assemble the rest of my handpiece. Alright, so now I'm ready to attach my blade guard and my blades or my blade system to my handpiece. First thing I need to do though is I need to assemble my blade setup. Now the arbor has three pieces. You've got the bottom that also has your tang that's going to hook into your flex shaft. We have the top, and we also have a little screw here. Okay. The blades have teeth that cut in only one direction, so it's very important that you get this inserted correctly. It's pretty easy to do because there's writing, but only on one side. And you want to insert your blade so that the writing is on the top. So I've just taken my mandrel here, hold it, put on the blade, put on the top, and then I'm just going to take my little screw here and thread this in. You want to be careful not to cross thread this little screw that's here. And I'm going to tighten this, but I don't want to tighten it too much. You want to be able to have the ability for the blade to kind of slip a little bit if your blade happens to jam as you're cutting. The next thing is to put everything together on our handpiece. I'm going to insert or slip on my blade guard first, and I want to pull it down so that I can then go ahead and tighten up and insert my blade arbor with the saw blade on it. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that into place, tighten that on, and then what we'll do is now we'll slip the blade guard up over our blade, and this is meant to protect our hands, which is very important. Now how do you know where to put this blade? Well, that's where our blade guide comes into play, that comes along with our coil holder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert my blade guide into the slot that's on my blade guard, and from there I'm going to center my saw blade. Okay, and I don't know if you can see this or not on the video, but I want to center my saw blade within that guide, and then I'll tighten up the screws that hold this onto my handpiece. And at this point my blade should be centered within the guide, and that will allow me to cut my coil safely. Now before we can make any coils or cut any jump rings, we need to make the coil. So I have my wire winder here, or my coil winder, and Kevin, being the beautiful tool maker that he is actually making one that looks a little better than this. So yours might look slightly different, but the concept is still the same. Now, I'm moving, so I didn't want to go through and attach this to my bench at this point in time because I'm just taking everything down. So I needed to find another way to make it so that my coil winder was secured to a top, and I didn't have any C-clamps. So as I began to look around, I noticed my bench pin and anvils that I use on my bench. And the nice thing about these is that you can slip this part out, and that there's a little slot in here where you can insert, you know, your bench pins or whatever else, and then you just put this onto your table and tighten it up. So I happened to think about it and thought, well, why not? Should work. And sure enough, it does work. So this is what I did for mine. Just took this in, inserted it, tightened it up, and now I have a secured coil winder. Now, to wind my wire onto a mandrel, the mandrels come with a little groove cut into them. I don't know if you can see that very well or not. There is a little groove, so I've just put a little bend in the end of my wire. I'm going to insert that into the groove, and then I'm going to insert that into my coil winder, and I will tighten up the jaws or the chuck on this. And sometimes it's a little easier said than done. Probably a little easier when you're not being filmed. So I'll get this tightened in here and we'll be right back. Okay, once you get your wire and your mandrel secure, then what you want to do is you'll just start winding. Now it's important that you keep this coil tight. So you want to kind of guide this with your thumb and forefinger to allow the rings to really come in and lay right next to each other. Okay. Now I've also found that sometimes this can really hurt your thumb and your hand. So what I like to do is use just a polishing cloth, and I will kind of put the pressure against that, and what this allows me to do is go ahead and wind this coil, but also kind of guide it into place. Okay, and if you happen to have a coil that kind of comes off a little bit, take the time, stop, push it back into place, and then keep on going. Alright, I'm going to keep doing this until I've wound out for a little while on the mandrel. Okay, so I finished up with my coil. You'll notice that all of them are pretty close together. Every now and then there's one that's got a little bit of space, and that's going to be okay. And you want to try to get that as close as you can. But then I also have this little spot here that just is too hard if I'm trying to do this by hand, even with a rag. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually take and just cut that little section off. But at this point, I'll release my mandrel, pull it out, pull my coil off, and you may find that it might be a little bit helpful to put some lubricant on your mandrels just to kind of help things slip off. So now I just need to cut off my ends, and we're ready to begin cutting our coil and make jump rings. Okay, so now that I have my coil made, I need to cut it into jump rings. So we're going to use our coil holder and in conjunction with our coil guide. Now on the back side of the coil guide, we actually have like a little stop plate here. And what this allows us to do is to put our coil in here and be able to screw in and make sure that the blade, as it comes across, will cut through all of the coils or all of the jump rings. Okay, without that, you would come across and there would probably be 4 or 5, maybe 6 or so jump rings that don't get cut. So it allows us to have a little bit of room there that the blade can continue to come through and make sure that everything is cut. Now, in addition to that, you need to make certain that on the other end, when you insert your blade, you have enough room there with no jump rings that you can insert the blade and cut through. So as I was trying to figure out this whole system, I figured out that if your coil is 3 1/4 inches or about 8 centimeters, then you're going to be good. So 3 1/4 inches, 8 centimeters or less, and you should be just fine. Anything longer than that, then you really do run into issues with having some of your rings in the way before you start to cut. So what I like to do is I put my coil in here. Now, some people have said that they like to put something to stabilize the coil, you know, as they're cutting, it just kind of helps. Really, you don't need to, as long as you tighten up your coil guide tight enough. So what I do is I'll put it more towards my screw, and then I'll use that blade stop or that guide that I said before, and I'll just kind of scoot it down, and then I'll insert my screws and begin to tighten them. Now again, be careful that you do not over tighten these. They just need to be hand tightened. Okay, and you don't have to take them all the way down. Now I'm going to go ahead and screw these down so that it does create a tight fit for me, but I'm not going to push it so much that this top plate will come tight with the bottom. If I do that, then what happens is the tension is going to create a bow over my jump ring, particularly if my coils don't go all the way to the ends, which they don't. So I don't want to create that bow, but I need it so that my coil is still held tight enough. Okay, so again, I've just kind of hand tightened this, made sure everything is good and secure. I've put this into a little vise on my bench, and that way then I can come in and make my cut and use both of my hands to kind of guide my blade and the flex shaft handle. Anytime you're going to cut through metal with any kind of blade, you really ought to lubricate your blade. It's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to extend the life of your blade by giving it a little bit of lubrication. It allows it to cut easier, and it also keeps your blade cooler. So what I want to do first thing is I want to apply some lubricant. Now in this case I have some Burlife, or just it's some kind of like a waxy substance. You can use a block of beeswax. You can use some like tap oil. There's a number of different things, but you just want to make certain that you get your blade lubed pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and twist my blade and run it through just a couple times, or one quick swipe through my lube, and that should be enough. Now, you never want to have your blade running when you go to put it into the blade guide. Okay, so you want to do a fit when it's stopped, and then you'll turn it on, and then you'll cut through your rings. Now, it's also very important that when you cut your rings that you go very slowly. Okay, some people think that you should just go really fast and zoom right through, but the thing is that that's really hard on your tools and on your blades, because what will happen is that blade is going to try to take too big of a chunk of metal out, and that's when you run into binding problems. So go slow, let the job or the tool do its job and work its way through the metal. And that means to go slow, and it's a little bit harder for some people, and you also sometimes feel like it's going to rush on its own, and that's okay. If the blade pulls itself through, let it go ahead and pull itself through, but make sure you're the one that's doing the guiding. So what I'm going to do is insert my blade onto my guide, and I'm going to hold it with both hands, start my flex shaft now, and I'll go ahead and pull my way and cut through. The stop here, or the screw here, will go ahead and stop me when I'm all done. Okay, so again, I want to go ahead and get my blade going so that it's fast enough, but not too fast, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring it right on through. And like I said, you want to just kind of go slow. You don't want to make it go too fast. Let the saw do its job. Okay. Alright. And once you get through, you want to go ahead and stop your blade, and then you'll lift your thing or your saw blade off, and then you can go ahead and pull out your jump rings. Okay, so now in this case I didn't go all the way through, so my entire coil is not cut. But anyway, I'm going to unscrew this, lift off my blade guide, and here are now my cut rings. Okay, they may have a little bit of a burr on them. So what you can do from here, I like to thread them onto a really thick wire, and I'll stick them in my tumbler for a couple of hours, or even just an hour, and it's going to knock that little bit of a burr that's on there off. And that's how you use your coil cutter.